I sat in the cold leather chair of the lawyer's office, my fingers drumming absently against the armrest, my mind clouded with grief and exhaustion, still trying to process the fact that my father was gone. The office smelled like old books and stale coffee, the air thick with the kind of tension that only comes when family money is involved, when years of whispered resentments finally boil over, when people who are supposed to love each other suddenly start looking at each other like enemies. I had told myself that today was just a formality, that my father's will would reflect what he had always told me, that he wanted things to be fair, that he had worked his whole life to provide for both me and Beth, that we would split everything down the middle because that was the right thing to do. But the moment I saw Beth sitting across from me, legs crossed, lips curved into the slightest smirk, her nails tapping rhythmically against the mahogany table, I felt a sick, sinking feeling settle in my gut, a quiet, gnawing certainty that something wasn't right. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, his face unreadable as he shuffled through a stack of papers, his expression so carefully neutral that it made my stomach churn even more. He wasn't looking at me, wasn't acknowledging the tension in the room, wasn't giving me any reassurance that this was about to go the way I expected. "All right," he said finally, glancing at us over the rim of his glasses. "As you both know, your father left behind a considerable estate, including financial assets, properties, and various personal investments. His will, as per standard procedure, was updated within the past year and filed accordingly." I nodded, my hands gripping the arms of the chair a little tighter, bracing myself, waiting for him to read the words that would confirm that my father had been the fair man I always believed him to be. And then, the lawyer said something that made the world tilt beneath me. "Beth Harrison has been named the sole beneficiary of the estate." For a moment, the words didn't make sense, didn't register, didn't feel real. I blinked, my body going stiff, my breath catching in my throat, my mind scrambling to process what I had just heard. Sole beneficiary. As in everything. As in I get nothing. Across the table, Beth let out a soft, triumphant exhale, her smirk widening just slightly, the barest flicker of satisfaction flashing in her eyes before she quickly masked it, pretending to be somber, pretending to be just as surprised as I was, pretending that this was—
Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Wasn't something she had already known. I turned to my mother expecting, hoping, to see shock on her face, to see her shaking her head, to hear her demand an explanation, to hear her tell the lawyer that there must be some kind of mistake. But she didn't. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes staring down at the table as if she couldn't bear to look at me. And that was when I knew. She had known. Beth had manipulated her, had gotten into her head, had twisted the situation so completely that our own mother had let this happen, had stood by while my sister stole everything from me. I let out a slow, controlled breath, forcing myself to stay calm, forcing myself to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs, even though my fists were clenched so tightly that my nails were digging into my palms. "There has to be a mistake," I said finally, my voice coming out sharper than I intended, my eyes locked on the lawyer, searching for any sign that he would look back at me and tell me that this was wrong. But he didn't. He just sighed, flipping through another page, nodding slightly as he pointed to the document in front of him. "This will was officially signed and notarized 6 months ago," he said, glancing between me and Beth. "It is legally binding and overrides any previous versions." 6 months ago. That was around the time Dad had gotten sick. That was when Beth had started visiting more often, when she had suddenly started playing the role of the devoted daughter, when she had started whispering in his ear, making sure he was dependent on her, making sure she was the one handling everything. She had planned this. I looked back at Beth, my jaw tight, my stomach churning, my hands still clenched into fists, but she didn't even have the decency to look guilty. If anything, she looked amused, like this was some kind of game she had just won, like she was enjoying watching me unravel, like she had been waiting for this moment. She tilted her head slightly, feigning sympathy, but the smirk was still there, lurking beneath the surface. "Oh, Jake," she sighed, shaking her head. "I know this is unexpected, but Dad just wanted what was best. He trusted me to handle things, and I guess he just didn't think you needed as much help as I did." I wanted to lunge across the table and wipe that smug expression off her face. I wanted to scream at my mother for letting this happen. I wanted to burn everything down. Instead, I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath, forced myself to swallow the rage threatening to spill over, forced myself to think. Because I wasn't going to let this happen. Beth may have thought she had won, may have thought that she had played me, may have thought that she had pulled off the perfect betrayal, but what she didn't know, what she had never understood, was that I wasn't someone who just rolled over and accepted defeat. She had lied. She had stolen from me. And if she thought she was going to get away with it, she was dead wrong. I leaned back in my chair, my expression carefully blank, my voice even. "All right," I said simply, watching as Beth's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. She expected me to explode. She expected me to fight her right then and there. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Because while she was sitting there, celebrating her stolen victory, she had no idea that I had already made up my mind. I was going to take back what was mine. And when I did, Beth was going to regret ever thinking she could beat me. I spent the rest of the meeting in a daze, barely hearing anything the lawyer said, barely processing the legal jargon spilling from his mouth, barely able to keep my rage in check as Beth sat there, looking as if she had just won the lottery, because she had. My lottery. My share of our father's life's work. My inheritance, stolen right out from under me. And she wasn't even trying to hide it. She was enjoying it. I could see it in the way she kept sneaking glances at me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to lash out, waiting for me to lose control. But I didn't. Instead, I clenched my jaw, nodded stiffly when the lawyer asked if I understood what had been read, and walked out without a word. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to think before I did something stupid. But before I even made it out of the building, I heard the sharp click of heels behind me, followed by the familiar, falsely sweet voice of my sister. "Jake, wait a second," Beth called, her tone dripping with forced concern. "I think we should talk about this, you know? Get everything out in the open." I stopped but didn't turn around right away, flexing my fingers at my sides, trying to remind myself that violence wouldn't fix this. When I finally turned, Beth was standing there with her arms crossed, an almost pitying look on her face, like she was about to explain something very simple to a very stupid child. "Listen," she sighed, shaking her head slightly, her blonde hair bouncing perfectly in place as if she had just walked off a magazine cover instead of out of the room where she robbed me blind. "I know you're upset, but you're really overreacting right now. You're confused, Jake. I mean, Dad made his decision. It wasn't me, it was him." I let out a slow, measured breath, my muscles coiling tight, my mind racing with every single reason I knew that was a lie. "Dad told me multiple times that he wanted everything split evenly," I said, my voice low and steady, forcing myself to stay calm when all I wanted to do was shout. "So you expect me to believe that, out of nowhere, he changed his mind and gave everything to you?" Beth had the audacity to laugh, shaking her head like I was some clueless idiot who had no idea how the world worked. "Jake," she said in that condescending tone she always used when she wanted to make herself seem smarter, better, superior, "Dad just knew I was more responsible. He wanted to make sure everything was taken care of, and I mean, let's be honest. What would you have done with all that money? Blown it on something dumb." I clenched my fists, hard enough to hurt, my nails digging into my palms, my blood boiling beneath my skin. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper because if I spoke any louder, I might lose it completely. "You stole my inheritance, and now you're calling me irresponsible?" Beth shrugged, completely unfazed, completely confident that she had already won, that I was powerless to do anything about it. "I didn't steal anything," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I just did what Dad wanted. I mean, if you want to waste your time being angry about it, go ahead, but honestly, you should be thanking me. At least this way, the money is actually going to be used wisely." I had never hated anyone more in my entire life. Before I could say something I might regret, I turned on my heel and walked away, ignoring the way Beth was still smirking, ignoring the way she actually thought she had gotten away with it, ignoring the way my own mother had let this happen. Because I had just made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let her win. And if Beth wanted to play dirty, play dirtier. The first thing I did was go back to my father's lawyer, the one who had handled all of his business affairs for years, the one I knew my father had trusted before Beth started whispering in his ear. Mr. Carter was an older man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and when I sat down in his office, I could tell from the way he looked at me that he already knew what had happened. "Let me guess," he said, sighing as he leaned back in his chair. "Beth got everything, didn't she?" I nodded, my jaw tight. "And I don't believe for a second that it was legitimate," I said, placing my hands on his desk, leaning forward. "You handled Dad's affairs for years. Tell me, was there ever a version of the will where Beth was supposed to get everything?" Mr. Carter studied me for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his chin. Not until very recently, he admitted. But here's the thing, Jake. There's something off about it. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? Mr. Carter pulled out a folder from his desk, flipping through it until he reached a specific page, then turned it toward me. This is the will your father signed 2 years ago, he said, tapping the paper. 50-50 split, just like he always said. I felt a flicker of hope, my pulse racing now. Okay, I said, leaning closer. So what changed? Mr. Carter pulled out another document, this one looking identical to the first, except for one crucial difference. This, he said grimly, is the will that was submitted to the court. The one that says Beth gets everything. I stared at the 2 pages, side by side, my blood running cold. They were exactly the same. Same format, same wording, same signature. But one had been altered. Beth hadn't just manipulated our father. She had forged the will. I barely remember driving to her house after that. Barely remember storming up her driveway. Barely remember pounding on her front door hard enough to make the frame rattle. When she finally answered, she was still smirking, still looking so sure of herself, still acting like she had already won. Jake, she said, folding her arms across her chest. Did you come to apologize for that little tantrum earlier? I took a step forward, shoving the 2 wills in her face, my entire body trembling with fury. You forged it, I growled, my voice shaking with barely restrained rage. You actually forged the damn will, Beth. For a second, just a split second, I saw something flicker across her face, something that almost looked like shock. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced with amusement, with arrogance, with that same infuriating smirk. And then she laughed. A full-bodied, unapologetic, mocking laugh. Like I was a joke. Like she wasn't even scared. Like she still thought she was untouchable. And that was the moment I knew. She had no idea what was coming for her. Beth had always been good at pretending, always had a way of making herself look like the victim, always knew how to twist the truth just enough to make people believe whatever story she wanted them to. But this was a whole new level of delusion, a level of arrogance so grand that even I was surprised by how far she was willing to take it. She didn't just steal my inheritance. She flaunted it. She wasn't content with just taking what wasn't hers. She had to rub it in my face, had to make sure that everyone knew that she had won, that she was now living the kind of life she had always thought she deserved. Started with the social media posts. Pictures of champagne glasses clinking together on marble countertops. Videos of her touring luxury car dealerships, running her manicured fingers over the leather seats of sports cars. Selfies in high-end boutiques. Captions filled with hashtags like #blessed and #living my best life. And then came the biggest announcement of all. The one that made my blood boil. She bought a mansion. Not just a nice house, not just a bigger place, but a multi-million-dollar mansion in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The kind of place with towering gates and long driveways. The kind of place that was so obnoxiously expensive that it didn't just scream money. It sneered it. And she had bought it with my inheritance. I sat in my tiny apartment, the one-bedroom space I could barely afford, staring at my phone screen as Beth live-streamed herself walking through the grand entryway of her new home. Her voice dripping with fake excitement. Her laughter echoing through the massive empty halls as she bragged about how she had finally found the perfect place to settle down. Guys, I cannot wait to move in, she gushed, spinning in a slow circle to show off the massive chandeliers, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek modern design of a house that I knew. I just knew she had no business affording. This is just the beginning, you know? Hard work really does pay off. Hard work. She actually had the nerve to say that. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached, my fingers curling into fists at my sides as I fought the urge to throw my phone across the room. I had spent my entire life working for everything I had spent years grinding, saving, scraping by, while Beth had spent hers coasting, manipulating, using other people to get ahead. And now, she was standing in the middle of a mansion, acting like she had earned it, acting like she had built this life for herself through determination and ambition, acting like she hadn't stolen every damn cent that made it possible. I couldn't just let this happen. I wouldn't. The next morning I met with my lawyer, Mr. Calloway, a sharp, no-nonsense man with a reputation for taking down people who thought they were above the law. I had shown him the 2 wills, had explained the sudden change, had laid out every shady move Beth had made in the months leading up to our father's death. Now, sitting across from him in his office, I watched as he skimmed through the documents again. His sharp eyes scanning every detail, his expression unreadable. Well, I asked, barely able to keep the impatience out of my voice. Tell me there's a way to prove she forged it. Calloway let out a slow breath, setting the papers down before lacing his fingers together on the desk. There is, he said, nodding slightly. And I can tell you right now, Beth is in a lot more trouble than she realizes. Forging a legal document like this. It's not just unethical, it's a felony. And if we can prove it, she won't just lose the money, she could be looking at prison time. I exhaled sharply, my pulse quickening at the thought, my mind racing with the possibilities, with the idea that Beth might actually face real consequences for once in her life. But then, Calloway's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable flickering behind his gaze, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. There's just one problem, he continued, tapping his fingers against the desk. She hasn't spent all of the money yet, has she? I frowned, shaking my head. No, I said slowly. She bought a mansion, but as far as I know, she hasn't moved in yet. She's still showing it off, but I don't think she's actually closed on it. Calloway nodded, exhaling through his nose, his fingers tightening slightly. That's what I was afraid of, he muttered. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if what he was about to say wasn't something that needed to be overheard. If Beth hasn't officially closed on the property yet, he explained, then technically she doesn't own it. She may have put down a deposit, but until the sale is finalized, that house is still in limbo, which means if we act fast, we may be able to block the transaction before she ever sets foot inside it as the legal owner. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding, my mind racing with the implications of what he was saying. You're telling me there's a way to stop her from moving in? Calloway nodded, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Not just that, he said, his voice low and deliberate. There's a way to make sure that when she does try to move in, she gets the shock of her life. I stared at him, my pulse hammering, my breath coming out slow and measured as I processed what he was saying, as I realized that this wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about teaching Beth a lesson. This was about making sure that when she finally tried to step inside her stolen dream home, when she finally thought she had won, when she finally believed she had beaten me, she found out in the most humiliating way possible that she had lost everything. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the desk, my voice steady but filled with something dark, something determined. Tell me exactly what we need to do. I had always known that Beth was reckless, always known that she played fast and loose with the truth, always known that she had no concept of consequences, but even I was surprised by how stupid she was being. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She had turned it into a public spectacle, flaunting her wealth on social media, making sure that everyone knew she was suddenly rolling in money, making sure the whole world saw her as some kind of self-made success story. The irony of it all was so infuriating that I almost had to admire her sheer delusion. But what Beth didn't realize, what she was too arrogant to even consider, was that she had left behind a paper trail so messy, so obvious, that taking her down was going to be almost too easy. While she was out shopping for overpriced furniture and posting videos of herself sipping champagne in her soon-to-be mansion, I was meeting with my lawyer, gathering every single piece of evidence I needed to prove that she had committed fraud. Calloway had been right. If we moved fast enough, we could block the sale of the house before Beth ever got her hands on it. And that's exactly what we were going to do. I spent the next week doing nothing but collecting proof, making sure that when the time came, there wouldn't be a single loophole for Beth to crawl through. I went through my father's financial records, pulled up old emails, text messages, anything that hinted at his original intentions for the inheritance. I reached out to old family friends, people who had spoken to my father in his final months, people who knew that Beth's version of events was a lie. And most importantly, I worked with Calloway to get an official forensic analysis on the will. An analysis that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Beth had forged the damn thing. Every move I made was calculated, every step carefully planned, every decision made with the knowledge that I couldn't afford to screw this up. Beth had spent her whole life manipulating her way out of consequences, had spent years getting exactly what she wanted without ever facing the fallout, but this time she was going to crash and burn. And the best part, she had no idea it was coming. Beth had decided to throw a housewarming party before she even officially owned the mansion, which should have been my first clue that she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. She sent out flashy invitations, hyped up the event on social media, made sure that everyone in her social circle knew that she was about to move into a house that wasn't even legally hers yet. She was so busy celebrating that she hadn't even noticed the cracks forming beneath her feet, hadn't realized that her entire world was seconds away from collapsing. I watched from a distance, keeping tabs on her posts, tracking her movements, making sure I knew exactly when the party was happening, because that was the moment I was going to strike. On the night of the party, I drove past the mansion just to see it, just to witness the ridiculous display of excess that Beth had put together, just to remind myself exactly why I was doing this. The entire property was lit up like a damn Christmas tree, expensive cars lining the driveway, music blasting so loud I could hear it from the street. Beth had hired caterers, bartenders, even security, acting like she was some kind of celebrity, like she wasn't just a fraud standing on stolen ground. I parked a few blocks away, pulled out my phone, and made the call that would change everything. "Do it," I said simply, my voice steady, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was a brief pause on the other end before Calloway responded. His voice calm, professional, final. "It's done." And with that, Beth's so-called perfect life was officially over. What Beth didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly seen coming, was that while she was out throwing her lavish party, I had made a mysterious financial transaction, one that ensured she would never step foot in that mansion as its rightful owner. Because the truth was, Beth had made one fatal mistake. She hadn't bought the house yet. She had only put down a deposit. And while she was too busy parading around like she had already won, I had quietly worked behind the scenes to make sure that I was the one who finalized the purchase. Beth had stolen my inheritance, but I had bought her dream right out from under her. And tomorrow morning, when she finally sobered up from her overpriced champagne and tried to move in, she was going to get the shock of her life. Beth had always lived in her own little bubble, always walked through life with this unshakable confidence, always assumed that things would go her way simply because they always had. She had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation, years convincing people that she was smarter than she actually was, years getting away with every selfish, cruel, and dishonest thing she had ever done. But what she never seemed to realize, what she had never prepared for, was what happened when someone like her finally got caught. The first sign that her world was about to collapse came when her lawyer unexpectedly dropped her case. I knew the moment it happened because I got a text from Calloway that morning, a short and to-the-point message that made me grin the second I saw it. "Beth's attorney just withdrew representation. She's officially on her own." I sat back in my chair, running a hand through my hair, letting that information settle, letting myself savor it. I had expected Beth's lawyer to drop her, had known that the second they realized what she had done, had proof of what she had done, they wouldn't want any part of the mess she was tangled in. Because Beth hadn't just been a little shady with my inheritance, she had committed fraud. She had altered a legal document, had submitted forged paperwork, had essentially tried to pull off a crime. And no halfway decent lawyer was going to sit next to her in court and try to argue her way out of it. The second her lawyer walked away, Beth lost her only real defense. She just didn't know it yet. The next step was making sure everyone else knew what she had done. Beth had spent the past few weeks showing off her stolen wealth, bragging about her new luxurious lifestyle, acting like she was on top of the world. She wanted attention, wanted admiration, wanted everyone to see her as successful. So I decided to give her exactly that, but on my terms. I took everything I had, every piece of proof, every falsified document, every damning financial transaction, every single piece of evidence that exposed Beth for the fraud that she was, and I made sure that the right people saw it. I sent it to local journalists. I forwarded it to real estate agencies. I made sure her social circle, those shallow, wealth-obsessed people she had surrounded herself with, saw the truth about her. Saw that the money she had been flaunting wasn't earned, wasn't deserved, wasn't even hers. I didn't even have to try to make it spread fast. People like Beth, people who build their entire identity around status, live in a world that thrives on gossip. And when people realized that the girl who had been bragging about buying a multi-million-dollar mansion had actually stolen the money to do it, they tore her apart. The first meltdown came on social media. Beth had been radio silent for an entire day, which I knew meant she was scrambling, trying to figure out who had leaked the information, trying to find a way to spin it in her favor. But there was no way out of it. People had screenshots, people had receipts, people were publicly calling her out. And the best part, Beth's usual friends, the ones who had always rushed to defend her, the ones who had always enabled her, were nowhere to be found. I knew the moment she snapped, knew the exact second that the pressure became too much, because suddenly, a new post appeared on her account, a frantic, defensive, all-caps rant that practically screamed desperation. "You people don't know anything. I worked hard for everything I have. Stop believing lies. Stop spreading rumors. None of this is true. Leave me alone." It was a disaster of a response, the kind of public breakdown that only made things worse, the kind of post that confirmed everything rather than disproving it. Because if there's one thing people love, it's watching someone who thought they were untouchable crash and burn in real time. But even after all of that, even after losing her lawyer, after watching her reputation fall apart, after seeing the world turn against her, Beth still didn't understand how bad things really were. She still believed she owned the mansion. She still believed she had won. She still believed that when the dust settled, she would be fine. And that was the funniest part of all. Because while she had been panicking online, while she had been screaming into the void, while she had been desperately trying to hold on to the last shreds of her fake image, she had no idea what was coming next. Beth had spent the past 2 weeks bragging about her upcoming move-in day, had spent thousands of dollars on luxury furniture, had planned an entire event to show off her new home. She had paid movers, had ordered champagne, had even scheduled professional photo shoots to document the grand moment of stepping into her new mansion for the very first time. She still thought that after everything, after all the damage, after all the exposure, she was going to walk into that house like she owned it. She didn't know, she couldn't know, that when she arrived, there would be nothing waiting for her. No keys, no welcome, no home, because she didn't own it. And when she finally showed up, when she finally arrived with her moving trucks full of expensive furniture, expecting to unlock the doors to her new life, she was going to get the shock of her life. Beth had always walked through life as if the world belonged to her, as if everything she wanted would somehow fall perfectly into place, as if she never had to worry about things like rules or consequences. She had spent years manipulating people, charming her way into getting exactly what she wanted, convincing herself that she was too smart to ever lose, too clever to ever get caught. But today was the day she finally learned what it felt like to be powerless. I stood at a distance, watching as the moving trucks rolled up to the mansion's grand iron gates, watching as Beth stepped out of the back seat of a sleek black car, dressed like she was about to walk the red carpet, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. She had done everything in her power to make this the most public event possible, had invited photographers, had hired videographers to document her triumphant arrival, had made sure that the world would see this as her moment. She still believed that she owned the house. She still believed that when she walked up to the door, the keys would be handed to her without question. She still believed that she had won. And that was what made this moment so perfect. Beth practically strutted up the front steps, her heels clicking against the marble, her posture screaming confidence, her phone in one perfectly manicured hand as she live-streamed the entire thing to thousands of followers. "All right, guys," she said into the camera, flashing her most polished smile, the one she always used when she wanted people to believe she was important, the one she had probably practiced in the mirror before getting out of the car. "This is it. Today is the day I officially move into my dream home. Can you believe this journey?" The comments on her stream were flying by so fast she probably wasn't even reading them, but I could imagine what they looked like. Some people praising her, others mocking her, and then, of course, the ones who already knew the truth, the ones who were waiting for the moment everything fell apart. She reached the door, inhaled sharply like she was about to savor the greatest moment of her life, then pressed the doorbell with a flourish, as if the very act of announcing her arrival was something special. And then she waited. The seconds dragged. Her smile faltered. Just slightly, but enough for me to notice, enough for me to enjoy. Then finally the door swung open. And Beth's entire world shattered. The man standing in the doorway was not a real estate agent. He was not a lawyer, not a property manager, not someone who had been sent to hand over keys or finalize paperwork or confirm that this house now belonged to Beth. No, the man standing in the doorway was the real owner of the mansion. And that owner was me. Beth's entire body went rigid, her eyes widening, her perfectly rehearsed expression of glamorous excitement dissolving into absolute horror as she stared at me. Her brain clearly short-circuiting, trying to process what she was seeing, trying to make sense of something that she couldn't understand. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, but no words came out. I leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed over my chest, letting the silence drag, letting her sit in the shock, letting her really realize what had just happened. "Hey, Beth," I said finally, keeping my voice light, almost bored, as if this wasn't the moment I had been waiting for, as if this wasn't the best thing I had ever done. "You look surprised." Beth's lips parted slightly, her entire body stiff, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling just slightly at her sides. "Wah," she started, but then stopped, shaking her head sharply, blinking hard as if she thought that maybe, just maybe, if she blinked enough times this would all go away. But it wasn't going away. Because this wasn't a dream. This was real. And she had just lost everything. Her hands clenched into fists, her jaw tightening, the sharp, dangerous gleam returning to her eyes as she forced herself to recover, forced herself to push down the panic, forced herself to fight back in the only way she knew how: denial. "No," she said, shaking her head again, her voice rising, her breath coming out fast and uneven. "No. This is a mistake." I arched an eyebrow, tilting my head slightly, pretending to think about it. "A mistake," I echoed, my voice dripping with mock curiosity. "What kind of mistake are we talking about, Beth? The kind where you tried to steal a house, or the kind where you got caught?" Her nostrils flared, her face flushing with rage, but I could see the fear creeping in, could see the way her eyes kept darting to the doorway, to the threshold she couldn't step over, to the house she had convinced herself was hers, to the dream that had just turned into a nightmare. "This is my house," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly, her hands shaking as she gestured wildly toward the mansion, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it true. I paid for this. I signed the damn papers." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "No, Beth," I said, my voice calm, my words slow and deliberate. "You put down a deposit. That's not the same thing as owning it." I let the words sink in, let her digest what I was saying, then added, "And before you could finalize the purchase, I bought it instead." She staggered back a step, her breath hitching, her hands flying to her mouth as if she had just been physically hit, her entire face draining of color as the truth finally caught up to her. I could see it in her eyes, the moment of realization, the exact second she understood that she had lost, the precise instant she comprehended that her perfect plan had just crumbled into dust. Her body swayed slightly, her knees going weak, her fingers gripping the edge of the stair railing for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. And then she collapsed, right there on the front steps of the mansion she had never owned, her legs giving out, her shoulders trembling, her breath ragged as she broke down completely, right in front of her movers, right in front of her so-called friends, right in front of the camera she had hired to document her big moment. Beth had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable, believing she could take whatever she wanted, believing she could manipulate her way out of anything. But today, she had nothing. No house, no inheritance, no future. And as I stood there, watching her fall apart, watching her finally understand what it felt like to lose, I realized something. I had never felt so satisfied in my entire life. Beth had always believed that she was smarter than everyone else, had always convinced herself that no matter what happened, no matter how reckless or selfish or downright cruel she was, she would always find a way to land on her feet. She had spent her entire life making other people clean up her messes, making other people pay for her mistakes, making other people suffer the consequences that should have been hers. But not this time. This time there was no one left to save her, no one left to bail her out, no one left to fix the disaster she had created. And the moment she realized that, the moment she truly understood that this time she had lost, it was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. Beth's scream was sharp, high-pitched, filled with a level of rage and desperation I had never heard from her before. Her entire body shaking as she shoved herself back up to her feet, her hands clenched into trembling fists at her sides. Her perfect hair was a mess, her makeup slightly smeared from the stress, her breathing uneven and shallow, but even now, even as the truth crashed down around her, she was still fighting, still refusing to accept what had happened, still trying to bend reality into something she could control. "You did this," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at me, her voice raw with fury. You set me up. You ruined everything." I tilted my head slightly, letting her words hang in the air, letting her rage echo across the empty driveway, letting her feel the weight of her own failure before I responded. "No, Beth," I said simply, my voice calm, steady, completely unaffected by her meltdown. "You ruined yourself." Her nostrils flared, her eyes blazing, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I had a contract," she snapped, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it real, as if there was some magical loophole she hadn't found yet, as if there was still a way for her to claw her way out of this. "I put money down. I was supposed to own this house." I let out a small, amused breath, shaking my head slightly as I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms over my chest. "Yeah," I said, arching an eyebrow. "And then I bought it first." Beth's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, her brain visibly struggling to process the information, struggling to comprehend the reality of what had happened, struggling to grasp the fact that her grand scheme, her perfect plan, had just collapsed into dust. You can't do that," she finally blurted out, her voice a mix of disbelief and sheer panic. her hands flying into the air like a child throwing a tantrum. You can't just steal my house." I laughed. Actually laughed, right there in her face, shaking my head in pure disbelief at just how delusional she still was. "Beth," I said, my tone almost pitying now, "do you even hear yourself? You stole my inheritance. And now you're mad because I bought a house that was never yours to begin with." Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching, the sharp, stinging truth of my words finally beginning to sink in. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "Let's get something straight," I continued, pushing off the doorframe, stepping closer, lowering my voice just slightly, making sure she felt every single word I was about to say. "You never actually owned this house. You put down a deposit, sure, but you didn't close the deal. You didn't sign the final contracts. You didn't legally take possession of it. You just assumed it was yours. You thought that because you stole my money, because you forged a damn will, because you always get your way, that nothing could go wrong. But guess what?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper. "You were wrong." Beth let out a choked sound, her entire body tensing, her shoulders rising and falling with each ragged breath, her mind desperately searching for some way, any way to turn this around. But there was nothing she could do. Because the house, it was mine. And that wasn't even the worst part for her. Because while she had spent every penny of my stolen inheritance trying to secure this mansion, while she had drained herself financially in the process, while she had poured everything into a dream that had just slipped through her fingers, I had one more move left to make. And it was going to destroy her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen a few times before turning it around to face her. Beth's eyes flickered down, narrowing slightly as she scanned the screen, her brain taking a few seconds to process what she was looking at. And then she screamed, because what she was staring at was a legal document, one that I had finalized just this morning, one that had taken everything away from her in a way she hadn't even realized was possible. "Beth," I said, watching her expression crumble, watching as she staggered back slightly, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're broke." She made a strangled sound, her hands flying up to grip her hair, her entire body shaking now, her eyes darting across the screen, desperate to find some loophole, some escape route, some way out. "You," she gasped, struggling for air. "You froze my accounts." Smiled. "I did more than that," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "See, when you stole my inheritance, that was fraud. And when I provided evidence of that fraud to the right people, well, let's just say, the banks weren't too happy about it." I took another step forward, lowering my voice again, watching as her world collapsed around her. "So now, you have no house, no money, no credit, and no one left to help you." Beth collapsed for the second time that day, sinking to her knees on the cold pavement, her head shaking wildly, her hands clutching at her face, her breathing ragged and uneven. She had spent her entire life climbing, manipulating, scheming, always making sure she was one step ahead. But today, she had nothing, and for the first time in years I felt free. I stood at the massive window of my mansion, sipping a hot cup of coffee as the sun cast golden light over the property that had almost been stolen from me. The air was crisp, the silence was peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without the weight of anger, resentment, and betrayal pressing down on my chest. The war was over, the battle had been won, and Beth, after years of manipulation, deceit, and selfishness, had finally been forced to face the reality she had spent her whole life avoiding. And yet, even as I stared out at the world that was now mine, even as I felt the undeniable satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, I couldn't stop the single question from creeping into the back of my mind. Did I go too far? Beth had always been cruel, had always been entitled, had always taken without hesitation, believing that she deserved more than everyone else simply because she existed. She had never cared about fairness, had never cared about what was right, had never once looked at me as her equal, only as an obstacle standing in her way. When she stole my inheritance, when she laughed in my face, when she tried to erase me from my own family's legacy, she never stopped to consider the damage she was causing, never stopped to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there would be a day when she'd have to pay for what she had done. And now that the day had finally come, now that she was sitting in the ruins of the life she had so carelessly built on lies, I knew that I shouldn't feel bad for her. But a small part of me still wondered. I had taken everything from her, just like she had tried to take everything from me. The difference was that I had played by the rules, had used the law, had outmaneuvered her without ever crossing the line into the kind of manipulation that she had thrived on for years. But the end result was the same. She had nothing. No money. No home. No future. And the look on her face when she finally realized it, when she collapsed onto the pavement outside of my house, when the reality of what she had done finally caught up to her. I would never forget it. I hadn't seen or spoken to Beth since that day, hadn't heard a single word from her in the weeks that followed, but I had kept tabs, just enough to know that she was struggling in a way she had never struggled before. Her once perfect credit was destroyed. Her social circle had abandoned her the moment they realized she had nothing left to offer, and the life of luxury she had so carefully constructed had vanished overnight. At first, she had tried to fight back, had tried to spin the situation, had tried to convince the world that she was the real victim. But people like Beth don't do well when their power is stripped away. The moment she lost her money, she lost her influence, and when people stopped believing in her lies, she had nothing left to cling to. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt vindicated. And in a way I did. But another part of me wondered if, despite everything, I had just become exactly like her. Had I really won? Or had I simply outplayed her at her own game? Was I better than her? Or had I just been more patient? I shook the thoughts away, turning my attention back to the house that had almost belonged to Beth, the house that she had thought would be hers forever, the house that she had dreamed of flaunting to the world. Now, it was mine, and she would never set foot inside it. A few days later I got a call from an unknown number, and before I could even think twice about it I answered. And the moment I heard the shallow, broken breath on the other end of the line, I knew. Jake. Beth's voice came through the speaker, weak, hesitant, defeated. Can we talk? I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the phone, my pulse steady, my emotions unreadable. What do you want, Beth? I asked, my voice calm, indifferent, completely unmoved by whatever sob story she was about to throw my way. There was a long pause, and for the first time in her life, Beth didn't have an immediate answer. I could hear her struggling to find the right words, struggling to adapt to a world where she wasn't the one in control, struggling to accept that I didn't owe her anything. Look, she finally said, her voice quiet, uncertain, like she knew she had nothing left to bargain with. I just need a little help. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head, unable to believe the sheer audacity of her even asking. Help? I echoed, tilting my head. Help with what, exactly? Beth inhaled sharply, her breath shaking, and I could almost feel the weight of her desperation through the phone. I have nowhere to go, Jake, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly, her pride crumbling piece by piece. I have nothing. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling, letting her words settle, letting myself absorb the full weight of what was happening. Beth, the sister who had stolen from me, lied to me, laughed in my face, was begging me for mercy. And for the first time in my life I had all the power. I could have helped her. I could have offered her a way out. I could have let her off the hook. Let her suffer just enough before throwing her a lifeline. Let her wallow in the consequences of her own actions before swooping in to fix it all. But then she would have learned nothing. Then she would have never changed. Then she would have done it all over again. So I did the one thing she had never done for me. I let her fall. Beth, I said, my voice cold, final, unshakable. This isn't my problem. And then, without waiting for a response, I hung up. As I placed my phone on the table, as the silence of the house wrapped around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wasn't bracing myself for the next betrayal, wasn't waiting for Beth to strike again. She had finally been forced to face the truth, to experience what it felt like to have everything taken from her, to know what it was like to lose. Did I destroy her? Or did I just let her destroy herself? I didn't know the answer. And honestly, I didn't care. Because sometimes, the only way to win is to let them burn their own world down.